Hello and welcome to session 293 in the AISafety.com reading group. Tonight I will be discussing my own presentation called The Probability of Doom is 0.95. My name is Søren Elverlin. I've been running this reading group for almost a decade now, and in 3 days on Sunday I'll give a presentation at EA Global Nordics. And this is going to be a scripted conversation, a presentation of a lightning talk for 8 minutes, which is not very long. And I will be able to have a slideshow that I'll show. It will be probably roughly like this one, but I expect I'll have to make it somewhat simpler because you can't show quite as much when you're seeing it on the screen compared to when you're sitting at home. It is a bit unclear to me who the audience is going to be at this kind of talk. I expect that there's going to be a lot of people who don't care that much about AI safety. And like EA is large and some of them specialize in animal welfare or veganism or something like that. So the relevant people that I'm really targeting are people who are moderately aware of the arguments for AI risk. So people who have heard, maybe they probably haven't really read Nick Bostrom's book Superintelligence, but they've through osmosis captured most of the arguments. Also, one thing that I can see is that a lot of the people who are there at EA Global have not been involved in the community for that long. So I'm going to hit them with this presentation, which I feel is definitely atypical. And I will come back to my reasons for this, but first I'm going to actually present this this presentation roughly as I would. Hello and welcome. My name is Søren Elverlin, and my probability of doom from AI is 95%. I've been working in AI safety for the past 10 years, and over the next 8 minutes I'm going to point out some of the less obvious trends that I've seen over the past decades that have caused me to reach this disturbing conclusion. In 2014, I read the sequences by Eliezer Yudkowsky and realized that safe AI would not happen by default. I founded AI Safety Denmark in 2016. I'm still running an online reading group with now 293 presentations on YouTube. In 2018, I founded AISafety.com, and I've built a substantial website there. I'm hosting bi-monthly X-Risk meetups at my house, and you can come join me on the 11th of May. 2 years ago, I quit my job to try to contribute in full-time, and that failed a bit more than 2 years later. So right now I'm catching my breath. I've gradually come to the conclusion that with 95% probability, AI will cause an existential catastrophe. Already when I started in 2014, I think the formal case for AI existential risk had been laid out pretty clearly by Nick Bostrom in his book Superintelligence. I'm not going to go into the details of the formal argument, but instead I'm going to look at the evidence we are seeing now and have seen over the past 10 years and see how that fits into some longer running trends. I'm going to talk about 5 different areas of trends. The first, timelines, then epistemics, technical alignment, coordination, and finally what I call inertia. Timelines only really matter if we use the time productively, but there have been substantial trends not just in timelines but in people's predictions on timelines. And every time it seems new capabilities are announced, we see people's timelines get shorter. This is a predictable error that people are making, and I urge you to not make this kind of error. One possible reason for this error is that a lot of people are looking at the challenges in order to advance the frontier, and they can't figure out a way to do that better, but they are not updating fully on the fact that some of the smartest people on the planet are trying to work around these limitations. The rate of increase in intelligence that we're seeing is not business as usual. The existing benchmarks map poorly to the dangerous domains. So I've tried myself to graph what I see as the trend, and I think we are on track for superhuman intelligence and superhuman strategic capabilities very soon, within a couple of years. This is very unprecedented. This is the graph that I'm showing here was basically 0 for 70 years leading up to this. So this is a very new thing. We are right now in a takeoff scenario by the textbook definition. We had hoped that epistemics would get easier when we actually had an AGI algorithm and implementation in our hand. And this has obviously not happened. We can't look at the giant matrix that is GPT-4 and figure out from that how dangerous is it. This gets even worse because we don't actually have the matrices in our hand. The AI developers are closed and they have a substantially more complex implementation than we know of, and our ability to interpret this AI is not trending up. There has been no fire alarm, nothing that has created common knowledge about AI risk, and it's likely that we will not get a fire alarm. A worrying trend is that over the last decade we have lost some important epistemic battles in that our words have been modified. The term AGI now basically means superintelligence. AI safety means AI brand safety. The AI shouldn't say naughty words. AI ethics has somehow been completely disentangled from AI safety and is mostly an opposed field right now. And AI alignment mostly means increasing capability while avoiding that the AI says naughty words that tell you how to build bombs. Technical alignment is mostly dead. What I mean by that is that most of the work that is called alignment is techniques that have no hope and no pretense of actually scaling to super intelligent level. In comparison, AI capability is increasing at a dramatic pace, and the reason for this, I believe, is that in alignment you can't get good feedback loops, but you can do that in capability. This is such a strong trend that, for instance, Miri decided to give up based on how dire that was looking. I am going to make the claim that we are making negative progress in the sense that we seem to be further from a technical solution now than we were a decade ago. Because there's been many things that turned out not to work. Boxing and testing methods have been shown pretty conclusively to not work. A decade ago we were not aware of mesa optimizers, and this is like a huge new problem that we also need to solve in addition to the original. The alignment text has become really heavy, and that's a really big problem for any potential solutions, and the explicit value loading methods have basically turned out to be been a dead end. Coordination also seems much harder now than in 2014 when Barack Obama was still promising change. We are really far from any kind of strong international treaty, and we're not moving towards such a treaty. We should in fact expect that it will be harder to reach strong international cooperation on this point as the value of AI becomes more obvious. The political world is not really helping us. The pause AI movement is mostly failing, and the companies that are building AI are not turning out to be particularly trustworthy. There have been a number of positive updates. I won't go through them here, but this is something you should not forget. If your plan is to pause, you can't see, that's actually a car in back here. If your plan is to brake just before you get to the cliff, to the precipice, then you really need to account for inertia. And the closer you get to the precipice before you brake, the harder you need to brake. It is hard right now to pause AI, but imagine later when it's the most valuable machine on the world and trying to convince people to pause that. That's going to be a lot harder. Or it might be that this technology is the only thing that is protecting your place of birth from being invaded. That's going to make it really, really hard to stop. We're also building a lot of scaffolding around large language models right now, and changing that to a safer paradigm and safer organization is going to be, at this point, pretty much impossible. The AI capability researcher pipeline is really strong. There are many universities doing this, and you get good feedback on that. On the other hand, the AI safety researcher pipeline is very weak. I've seen this firsthand, and I've seen a lot of people get burnt on that. This is a very big differential in trend. Also, the trust that's required for coordination takes a long time to build and a lot of work, and we're not doing this work right now. And trying to do that at the very last moment, at crunch time, seems like it's going to be really difficult. What we need to do now is to coordinate to pause AI. At this point, at this late hour, we have to make a hard pause, and it's gonna have to be really soon. And it's not just enough to pause, we need to use that time productively to actually fix the problem. We will probably be under very hard time pressure, and we have to get it right on the first try. On the other hand, humanity has solved harder technical challenges before, and in an absolute sense, the alignment problem doesn't look that difficult. The advice that helped me the most was Luc Mühlhauser's 2015 advice to delurk. Go to meetups, like my X-Risk meetup on the 11th. There's an unconference on Tuesday you can join, or join the reading group or some other project, or help me with AI safety. You should reach out to other concerned people by fearlessly stating your true beliefs. You might be surprised at the positive reception. People can stand when it's true, for they're already enduring it. Thank you. So this is the talk I'm going to give. I'm probably going to cut it somewhat shorter. There are a few things that I'm probably going to outright delete, and I'm also, like, on the fly going to adjust it, because some of it might be like, depending on how much time I have and how fast I talk, and if there are interruptions and we get delayed and things like that. So now I'm going to talk about, like, why I decided on this kind of subject. So my overall goal, I guess, is dignity points, as defined by Eliezer Yudkowsky, reducing the log odds of an existential catastrophe. And in order to do that, the dignity framing is something that helps me not just focus on what is maximally persuasive, but also, like, doing this with dignity. And I think my comparative advantage, like, obviously I have 10 years of experience. Skepticism is something that we've looked at very much. I have a broad knowledge of AI safety. I'm somewhat plugged into the community, and I know a bit about corrigibility and coordination on, like, the actual technical level. But the fact that I have 10 years of experience and none of the people that I'm going to present to have 10 years of experience is the actual thing that I feel is the area where I have the greatest ability to tell people something they don't know and that they can update on. It is important to me that this presentation is presenting a Bailey and not a mud. Like, you probably all know this, like, a Bailey is the large area you want to be in, and the mud is like the fort, the defensible positions. And I can see, like, 3 levels of defensibility. I have a hard mud, which are that there is 5% probability of extinction based on the standard formal arguments in Bostrom's book Superintelligence. And this is something that I am very capable of defending and that I feel very confident, but it is in fact not enough. This is not encompassing my true views. We get closer to what you could call a soft model, which are like informal arguments that are more worrisome, but also less defensible. The central example of this would be Yudkowsky's list of lethalities. And then there's the actual Baileys, like what is my actual beliefs? And my actual beliefs, to a substantial extent, hinge on my analysis of these trends. Like, where are we going? And this is what truly lies beneath my rather pessimistic and very unusual estimate that the probability of doom is 95%. And this, of course, means that my presentation is... I have no way of doing a rigorous presentation. I could do a rigorous presentation on the hard model. That would be like just repeating Buster, basically. That wouldn't be a problem at all. But here I'm explicitly making claims that I know I can't strongly defend. Like, when I say the estimate is 95%, then like there's a 50% probability that I'm overstating the case. This is a somewhat unusual and somewhat more vulnerable thing for me to actually say this. So trends. What kind of trends are we talking about? There are a number of obvious trends that people can measure, like parameter counts and loss functions. We've probably all seen these graphs. And like because everybody have seen them, it's not that interesting that I talk about them. It's not my comparative advantage. And I actually also don't think that important. Like, if you imagine that you have a model of how the parameter counts are going to grow, and what you probably have a guess on GPT-5, how many parameters will that have, and what loss will it achieve, and things like that. And even if you are pretty far off with that, you probably still have roughly the same probability of doom. I think the unobvious trends are much more important. At least they are to me, but these are much less legible, of course. It is closer to a worldview, but not quite. Somewhere in between. We're not talking about like cynicism or ideology or something like that. But these trends that I'm pointing to lie somewhere in between those. You could, like, a cynic would totally say that, yeah, that is like a trend that things are bad and they'll always get worse or something like that. And I'm trying to like hit a more justifiable level than that. So before I get to the 5 trends, one trend that I think is a meta trend is a lack of epistemic courage. And I think this is something that I've seen a lot. A lot of people, when they talk about Hinton and like a lot of the people who are, even Paul Christiano says, when he talks about his estimate for doom, he uses the phrasing that it's at least 5% or at least 50% or something like that. Always giving lower bounds, because to some extent they are not brave enough to actually state their true beliefs. And I think this is a mistake. They are miscommunicating, and their audience gets the wrong picture. I also think it's a strategic mistake. Like, they're obviously doing it for strategic reasons, and I think they're just straight up wrong. People appreciate candor and that you state your actual beliefs. And for that reason, I have gone to great lengths to actually explicitly state my pDoom. I had a slide that was literally just that. I also made it the title when I think it should probably have been the subtitle, because I don't want to shy away. I want to look people in the eye and say, this is what I truly believe. And that's kind of a sub-goal with this presentation, is to get people to actually communicate frankly. And that's also what I talk about very much at the end. So for the first, for the 5 slides that are like the meat of the presentation, the timelines, I was quite a bit in doubt about how to communicate that timelines don't actually matter very much. Like, whether it takes 5 years or 10 years until we die doesn't really matter that much. I also kind of equivocated about whether it was a good idea to try to give like, a lot of people have consistently make their timelines shorter whenever there's a new breakthrough. I think that's a trend that I'm pretty certain about.
Are we like still are you giving the presentation like are you explaining the presentation to us? Can we ask questions right now?
Sure, you can ask questions.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty reasonable for people's timelines to predictably get shorter, because I think there's an underlying assumption that at some point our current methods will no longer scale and we'll get something like an AI winter. So as long as you keep seeing progress, you predictably shorten your timelines because you're not seeing like our current methods breaking down.
Sure.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. That's totally true. Like depending on like every time there is evidence presented, you are obviously supposed to like update on the evidence. And oh, I just got a lot of messages here. But I think what we are actually seeing is something very, very different from this. A lot of people are saying that in AI, a lot of people were saying something like AIs could never do something like, I don't know, write a poem or something like that. And then they see an AI that can do it. And then it's not that they are just seeing a bit more evidence. It's something that is changing very dramatically how people, people can expect from AI. Like people are predicting that it will take, like for instance, the ability of an AI to like write code that corresponds to an AI was something that a lot of people predicted would be done in like 2100 or something really, really extreme. And then they see, oh, it seems like that is actually a thing that can happen. And then they update on that. And then they see the difference between GPT-3 and GPT-4. And then their timelines doesn't shrink as much as like the expected evidence, but dramatically more. Like I think a lot of people was extremely surprised by GPT-4 to a I don't actually have a really good formalization of this point, that people seem to get very surprised by the fact that it continues to scale. Did that make sense?
Kind of.
Kind of, yeah.
I mean,
All of
I mean,
this
it's
are
like
things that,
once you see GPT-3 and is GPT-4 that much of a surprise? I would expect people to expect GPT-4 if they were in the loop, so to speak, if they were paying attention.
yeah, yeah, and a lot of people were still very surprised. And I think another example perhaps would be something like ChatGPT, where the difference in capability between ChatGPT and like GPT, where we're at 3.5 at that time or something like that, was basically nil. Like it's not really a stronger model. It's just something that makes the actual capabilities of the model more salient. And that's something that shouldn't cause people's timelines to update very much, but in fact turned out to cause a lot of people to change their timelines substantially. People's timelines don't strongly track how smart is the AI to some extent. I can pose the other question. Do you feel that a lot of people were too surprised by ChatGPT compared to how surprised they ought to have been?
Yes.
I think that is, yeah. I'm just going to continue. We may be able to talk about this later. And I try to give an explanation for why I think people's timelines are like disconnected to the evidence and so changed in this way. There couldn't have been others, and I may in fact cut off that explanation. I also thought a lot about whether I should include my graph of like strategic capability, the thing that I call like IQ, always with quote marks. And I know a lot of people would fixate on that and try to nitpick and something like that. But I think it is in fact really important to me, and I think this expresses to some extent a core part of my belief on AI. So I wanted to have it. And this idea that it is a hockey stick graph where it's totally flat and then it starts to go up is something that I feel um, is really important. That there is a strong sense that it's not business as usual. I also have heard surprisingly few people explicitly acknowledge that we are in a takeoff, like a slow takeoff. Perhaps people have mostly changed the definitions on takeoff to mean a fast takeoff, but like by the Bostrom textbook definition, we are totally in a takeoff, and I want to make that clear. On epistemics, like I think there's a lot of confusion about, like, can you say something like that GPT-4 is like at a human level, and a lot of people are just going to like reject for different reasons, like, is it in fact a general intelligence, and like what are the things it can't do. And I think that I'm explicitly stating that I believe that GPT-4 is a general intelligence, and a lot of people will reject my claim at this point, but I think it's really important that I say it, and so I'm gonna say it even without much of a reason. I think one of the underlying problems that I would really like to talk about, but that I don't talk about, is that like the worlds in which we're doomed and the worlds in which we're doomed, they look so identical until the end that we just can't get any kind of bets, and that's one of the key epistemic problems as I see it.
What do you mean by that? Because I would expect them to look very different.
Okay, so imagine that you are in a world where all large language models conspire always, and one where they never conspire. What difference would you see?
You mean like over the course of development, sometimes they always conspire and sometimes they
No,
never conspire?
you are in a world where the laws of coherence or something like that makes AIs makes all large language models always conspire, or you may be in a world where the math works out differently in some way, and large language models are always benign. What difference would you see?
I I think I would see probably a bunch of differences. I would expect to see examples of large language models conspiring and failing.
What would it mean to fail to conspire? Like,
So, for instance, I don't expect GPT-4 to be doing something like this, but if you ask me about GPT-5 or 6, and then, I don't know, you showed me a example of like GPT-6 or something trying to hack out of its containment facility, or trying to, and failing, or doing something like, I don't know,
yeah, like, but you would not see that.
trying
See
to
it.
convince the people who are using it that they should give it more power or whatever, and then I would go, okay, this seems like pretty worrying thing.
Okay, question: Have you ever seen a large language model try to convince people to give it more power?
Sydney
There has
Bing,
been
yes.
yeah, we have in fact seen that sometimes, and we
Yes,
would
and
expect to see that both in benign and non-benign worlds.
I suppose.
Yeah, but as you're going from subhuman capability to superhuman capability, you're going to find some really complex, well, not necessarily complex, but some kind of thing that can obviously be identified as a failed conspiracy in an unambiguous way if that was something they were doing constantly.
Uh, so, what would a failed conspiracy look like? While they would, why would they try to Like what is a failed conspiracy? Like they would obviously try to take over at some point, but they would obviously wait if they're conspiring. So they wouldn't actually try to take over until they had like a really high probability of success, right?
That assume like in order to for them to reason themselves into that situation
Mm-hmm.
and have a high level of certainty,
Yeah.
they would need to be really, really, really smart. But before that point, they're going to attempt doing that. Some of them are going to reason wrongly and conduct like a failed
Mm-hmm.
coup or something.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So we are in fact living perhaps in a world where the mental challenge in figuring this out is actually really small. Like this thing about a treacherous turn, not just you don't even have to figure out a treacherous turn from first principles. You can just like read Bustrum's book because they are trained on Bustrum's book. And I think this idea that you should bide your time is in fact really, really obvious and really, really simple, and very, very clear that GPT-3, possibly even GPT-2, understands this.
I disagree.
Do you think that GPT-3 doesn't
I mean,
understand treacherous
I
turn?
think that in order to get it to do a treacherous turn, you have to like summon a very specific simulacra, and then when it tries to do and then it's not going to be like continuously in stealth mode. You're going to be able to like elicit some kind of behavior where it's clear that it's like conspiring to do something.
Mhm.
Because we are talking about
Yeah.
GPT-3. But
Yeah.
you can still like get it into like making lists that never end. That's a level of
Hmm.
capability that sometimes devolves to.
Sure. Uh, so, like, I would be interested in some kind of bet um, for between if you can figure out a way to distinguish between the two.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm really tired right now, but
yeah.
I'll
Sure.
think it over.
Yeah. Um, so, and one of the things that I feel bad about here is like I had, for instance, I think in when I gave the presentation here, I didn't mention the part about moving the goalposts, and that's an example of places where I feel this is in fact a thing that has happened. That a lot of people have said when an AI is capable of doing X, then they'll be worried, and then the AI is capable of doing X, and then they turn out to like not really react and move goalposts for when they believe that AI capability could be dangerous or something like that.
Well, I mean, that's perfectly reasonable if you look at the history of AI development. Like, just go back to Deep
Mhm.
Blue. I mean, a lot of people
Yeah.
before Deep Blue were saying stuff like, once an AI is able to like beat human chess champions consistently, then it will be like as smart as a human being. But they're smuggling in a lot of like
Hmm.
implications like, oh, in order to play chess you need to be like able to like think about how your opponent thinks. You need to like do all this logical reasoning and all this fuzzy reasoning,
Hmm.
and then
Yeah.
in like the real world they just built a bunch of special chips that evaluated positions really, really, really fast, and they beat a
Hmm.
human that way. And like,
Yeah.
so when people said that an AI that can beat humans at chess would be an AGI or whatever, they meant something that specifically wasn't Deep Blue. So if they see
Hmm.
Deep Blue, they wouldn't expect um, their AI timelines wouldn't shorten by much if they were
Hmm.
like if they knew about how everything worked, and they were up to date on the field of AI.
Hmm. Yeah. I think this is a good example of when it is correct to move goalposts. Because sometimes as you learn more, then moving goalposts is correct. For this specific example of being able to like model your adversary and things like that is something probably that GPT-4 can do now. I think this would be an example of yeah. Perhaps it took a bit longer, but it has happened now, and people are not really uh, uh, are just continuously moving the goalposts.
Uh, I I think something similar to the Deep Blue example is still happening here, because if you showed me, well, when I first saw GPT-3, GPT-4, I expected it to be able to do a lot more than it currently is. I mean, I thought it would be able to like systematically do like black hat hacking and like finding exploits and security exploits and like common in like various networks, but like that hasn't actually happened because it can write really good code and it can write poetry, but still not coherent enough and doesn't have the same level of like strategic coherence as a mentally retarded human. So like just because it can answer an IQ test really well and write poetry really well and code better than 99% of human beings doesn't
Hmm.
actually mean it's strategically intelligent, or at least it's not more strategically intelligent than like someone with Down syndrome.
That is a very interesting claim. I think you have much higher appreciation for people with Down for with the strategic long-term coherence of people with Down syndrome than I have. But I think this is also kind of moving past the point here, because when what I'm trying to do is to point uh, out some of the trends as I see them, and I am explicitly going past the level where I can strongly defend them onto the point where I feel this is what I actually believe. Um, and this moving goalpost and like how strategically coherent are GPT-4 compared to most people is something that um, I think I'm pretty convinced, and I think I could defend pretty reasonably that it is better than being retarded than retarded people, most retarded people. Um, but I don't think that I could like. I'm certain that I could not rigorously defend the my actual claim at like how good is GPT-4 actually at something like strategic coherence.
Hmm. How strategically coherent do you think it is?
Um, so if you ask it for strategic coherence, I think it is in fact very strategic coherent. You need to ask it for that. But I think if you ask it to like role play out a scenario, not even necessarily a takeover scenario, but like running for politics and like coming up with a consistent political platform and figuring out who to make friends with and who not to in something like that, then I believe it would be quite strategically coherent. Yeah, it would not
But
suddenly decide to like change from being a Republican to a Democrat or something like that.
I mean, people do that in real life, but that's the size of the
Yeah,
point.
and I think
It's
a
just
lot of
like
people fail in
my gut
strategic.
check is just that we don't have a lot of auto GPT agents running around the internet making money. We
Mhm.
don't even see that a little bit. So it's implied that that's not something current systems are capable of. They all require like some kind of interaction with human in order to remain coherent, and probably a lot of interaction with the human doing the heavy lifting. Because otherwise, like someone would have been able to figure out a way to like make a huge amount of money, and we would have noticed.
So, what task do you feel that um, more precisely that AI agent ought to have been able to do, but haven't been able to do?
Like some kind of coherent. I was gonna say some kind of coherent HR agent, but they're already doing that in China, so whatever. Uh, like some kind of remote work agent that can do the same job as like a human temp worker. We haven't seen that yet.
What tasks more precisely are you talking about that a human temp worker can do that GPT-4 can't?
Like actually interact with other human beings, working with like various file configurations, going off of like um, text instructions on like data filtering on like messy real world stuff. I've seen people try this like on Twitter
Mhm.
and it like gets stuck s- eventually. Like maybe it can do a couple of files, but then it finds something and it doesn't work, and it like gets stuck in loops because they can't figure out what's going on, what it's doing wrong, and then it just like stops working.
Hmm.
And
Humans,
and
of course,
yeah,
also occasionally get stuck, and human temp workers, if they're doing something like data
yes,
cleanup, probably would also get
yes,
stuck.
but then they say, well, I can't solve this problem. I'll move on to the next one. But like, there's like some kind of coherence there where they can make minimum wage. GPT-4 cannot like even with a lot of human help with like automated structuring and like sub agents and like agents talking to each other, like they can't figure out how to make minimum wage as a temp worker consistently.
This is an interesting question, and I would be surprised uh, if this was mostly. Uh, um, I think I will need to return to this. I will write it down, and then I will uh, get a better answer to that in a moment. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, it's just like a world where they can do those things would look radically different. You know, in like the same way that they can make coherent art pieces based off of like text instructions and like change the art based off of feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Because they can do that really, really well, you know, human artists are losing their shit. They're getting fired.
Mm-hmm.
Like the people are switching over to AIs. That's the
Yeah.
type of stuff we would expect if they can do the same thing with like temp work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that is in fact an interesting question. Like something like data cleanup would be an example of a task that I would expect temp workers to be uh, very nearly removed from. I think they're still, um, and I notice I'm a bit confused. How is it possible to be um, a temp worker for something like that? Still interesting. I'll think about it, and then I will perhaps investigate to what extent this kind of temp work is still a big thing.
My understanding, just on the data cleanup side, is
Mm-hmm.
a lot of like big banks that rely on data cleanup, or
Mm-hmm.
just like big firms in general, they've um, outsourced to companies that use this type of technology that gets them a good percentage of the way there, and then they take on less staff to like, I guess, validate and verify that the data's been cleaned properly. Like
Mm-hmm.
my understanding, I think I don't remember who I was talking to, but they said it gets like 70 or 80% accuracy with data cleanup. So the result was not total automation, but like they just have fewer staff members dedicated to that type of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about what I would expect.
Okay. But in this case, like if we get like um, remove the perhaps the lowest skill 80%. This also seems like a substantial example of uh, what was the precise claim that we were making that I was defending here. Now I'm getting a bit lost. Um,
I think the claim was that if it's as strategically coherent as like a minimum wage temp worker, it should be able to like do all the jobs that a temp worker does coding wise. And the fact that temp workers like still have jobs means that there's something they can do consistently that GPT-4 can't, even
so
with like a lot of structuring.
yeah, in this case, like if they have already like automated like 80% of it, um, then it is not very clear to me that um, the remaining 20% probably has a lot more to do with like domain knowledge and also probably something that can be that will relatively soon the quality level is just going to increase substantially. So um, I think the trend is pretty clear, and like I also think that the it is unfair to characterize the people who are overseeing the cleanup that is being done uh, as like minimum wage, because even though they may make minimum wage, I still believe that they are in fact doing some moderately sophisticated work.
Mhm. I think it's just a lot of it just comes down to like being used as a tool versus like strategic coherence. Because obviously if a human structures like the workflow such that, oh, I'll throw everything at them and then like when they run into a problem, I'll take care of it. It's being used as a tool. It's not being used for its own agency or its own strategic coherence. When it relies on its own strategic coherence, it fails.
I do notice that I am in fact somewhat surprised at the relative failure of many of these, like AutoGPT, because I will need to look into that. I would probably make the prediction that a lot of this comes down to scaffolding, and it's going to be substantially better soon. But I noticed that I'm in doubt about this.
But yeah, people have been trying scaffolding for a year. Like my troll opinion is that people on the internet aren't very coherent. So by being coherent, it actually makes worse predictions. Or even if like being more coherent can allow it to make better predictions, maybe the marginal loss is just like not that big of a deal, and like and like it gets much better mileage by focusing on stuff like subtle spelling errors or like undercase versus uppercase or whatever.
Soren,
So
sorry to take this in another direction, but I did have some general thoughts on the presentation. Would now be a good time to offer them, or do you want to get through the rest of your slides?
I think general takes. I would like to try to get through this a bit faster.
Okay, perfect. I can
I'll
sit
go a
back
bit
for
faster.
you.
Yeah.
No worries.
And the changes in language was also something that I was in doubt about whether I should include. And there was more things I wasn't really sure about whether I should. Like one of the key trends that my worldview is substantially based on is that a lot of the alignment work that is being done right now doesn't seem like something that has any hope of scaling to super intelligent level. And that's a very substantial claim, and that is one that needs to be justified substantially, and a lot of my audience, perhaps also a lot of you, disagree with that, and that's not a thing I can do in a lightning talk. I think this would be an area where, if I had more time, I would definitely go into more details. And I make some claims here that I don't really have an easy I would be interested to hear if any of you have the same overall feeling that we are actually further from a technical solution to alignment right now than we are than we were in 2014. But I recognize this kind of probably holds on along to do you think that the current fuzzy methods are going to take us all the way, or will we need something like a proof? Because if we need something like a proof of alignment, then I think it's pretty clear that we are further away from that than we were in 2014. But if people are optimistic and think that this kind of fuzzy methods will scale to super intelligence, then they will probably have the opposite opinion. And again, this is really hard to justify. Coordination, I was also in doubt here. One thing I would have wanted to do if I had more time was to distinguish more clearly between the low-level informal coordination, for instance the Center of AI Safety's statement on AI risk, and UN treaties. I think it's pretty clear we haven't moved towards such a treaty in the last 10 years. And Rawls' Whale of Ignorance is also something that I really wanted to talk about, but also unfortunately I had to cut. Inertia is like this kind of meta trend that trends tend to continue, and I think this is in fact pretty important. Like the fact that we haven't made any progress towards an international AI treaty for the past 10 years is to me pretty strong evidence that over the next 2 years we are not going to suddenly get a UN treaty. It's certainly a thing that could happen, but it's quite unlikely. I also want to explicitly object to the strategy that OpenAI, Anthropic, and DeepMind have, that we will somehow be able to magically see the precipice when it's right in front of us, and then we'll just break. And that's a strategy that I think on closer inspection just doesn't hold up at all. I also wanted to talk more about the weakness of the AI safety researcher pipeline, but that didn't feel like the right thing to do, and yeah, there was more things. This slide about what needs to be done, pausing AI, doesn't really logically fit into the talk. I think it's important. I would like to include it, but if I'm pressed for time, that's probably one that's gonna go. I think EAGX Nordics is like a good place to talk about coordination because the people are there, and I would have liked to talk a lot more, but I'm not really gonna do that. Instead, I'm hoping to get a bit more time for the final slide. DLurk, that's a word that I think most people haven't seen, and that was really helpful for me. And I've been thinking a bit about why that was so helpful for me. But I think this is in fact the thing that I think a lot of people should do. Perhaps at EAGX Nordics, like the people there are somewhat more likely to already DLurk, and like they are going to EAGX, so to some extent they have already DLurked. But I think pointing out these very concrete things that people should do is helpful, and also like I'm calling on people to like be brave, and they are likely to get positive receptions. That's a trend that I think is really important, that if you talk to people and then you say this is what I actually believe, then people react much more positively to that than they do with like strategic communication. And then I end with the litany of Gwendolyn. Like people can't stand what is true, for they're already enduring it. I think that's kind of fun, and it's one of the things that has a high probability of also not being included in the final presentation, but I do in fact like that. So that is the presentation. I'm going to stop the recording now.